Our Holy Gospel this morning is from Mark, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus left the town that he was in and went to his own hometown. And his disciples followed him there. And when the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many who heard it were astounded. And they said to one another, "Where did this man get all of this? What great wisdom has been given to him? What great deeds have been done by the works of his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon, whose sisters are with us?" And so they were offended by Jesus. And Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown, among his kin, in his own house." And he could do no deeds of power there, except for he laid his hands on a few of those who were sick and cured them. So Jesus, though, was amazed at the unbelief amongst the people who knew him best. And then he went out among the villages nearby, and he began to teach and preach. And he called for the 12 disciples, and he began to send them out 2 by 2. And he told them to take nothing with them for the journey except for their staff, not to bring a bag or money for their purse, or sandals or bread, to wear only sandals and not to bring 2 tunics with them. And they said to them, "When you enter a house, stay there until you leave that village. But if the village does not welcome you, when you leave, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony to those people." And so the disciples went out and proclaimed that all should repent. And they casted out demons, and they anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Lord.
This week when I read our Old Testament reading, there was a verse that struck me that hadn't struck me when I had read it earlier a few weeks ago. And it's verse 4. It says, "David was 30 years old when he began his reign." David was 30. Can you imagine that? I mean, I at 37 get told all the time I'm too young to be a pastor. I know I'm not as respected as some of my older colleagues, even if I have been ordained longer, which, by the way, is 9 years at this point. I feel like I've been doing this long enough. But David was 30 when he became king. Can you imagine that today? I mean, the youngest bishop in the ELCA right now is 41, and he's an outlier, as there's only about 4 or 5 bishops in their 40s throughout the ELCA out of the 65 synods and our presiding bishop. 1. The youngest is 41. The average age of bishops is, by the way, is closer to retirement age, and by retirement age, I mean full retirement age with all the Social Security benefits. And I still think David was 30 when he became king. I mean, can you imagine the amount of headlines that would be written if tomorrow Prince William became the King of England about how he is too young to take on that position, even though the King of England is now basically a figurehead? You know there would be articles about that. And by the way, Prince William is 36, 6 years older than David was when he became king. We've placed limits on people's ages. And we've done this at both ends as well, because that 4th verse of the 2 Samuel chapter 5 continues. It says, "David was 30 years old when he began his reign, and he reigned for 40 years." Oh, well, now he's 70. Too old for that, right? You aren't as much of a spring chicken as you once were, aren't as virile. You don't have that sense of command anymore. Maybe you're losing your memory a little bit. You might as well retire. You have one foot in the grave, right? Please know I'm joking about that for all of you who are over 70. But we've placed limits about what people can do based on their age. Somehow 30 is too young and 70 is too old, and then there's that 40-year span in between. That's that sweet spot. But really, you're still too young or you're still too old, depending on what you are doing. And here's the actual truth. Age does not matter to God. This past week at the youth gathering, I saw teenagers being able to proclaim the life-changing message of God's love, grace, and hope better than many adults ever could. And if I had to rank my favorite speakers from the week, out of my top 4, one of them is a retired bishop at the age of 71, and the other of my top favorite speakers is an 11-year-old girl. And yet, at 11, younger than David was when he was anointed to be the future king, and at 71, older than David was when he died, those two speakers proclaim God's love and God's hope better than most people ever could. In fact, there was a lot of talk about how if we were asked to speak in front of 31,000 people, how most people would just freeze, if not have a bodily reaction to being in front of as many people, especially at the age of 11. And yet they proclaim God's love and God's hope with such passion. Age does not matter to God. Age does not matter when it comes to sharing God's love and God's grace and God's hope with other people. Jesus was only 33 when he died. When he returned to his hometown, I think one of the reasons why so many people had problems with him was the fact that they're like, we know this guy. We remember when he was this tall. Remember that time when him and his brothers got in trouble? Or I remember babysitting you or changing your diapers. And they couldn't see him as the adult he now was. The disciples who he sent out were mostly under the age of 30. They were mostly young. And yet the people who supported him, the ones whose houses he went to when he went back home, not to his hometown, but to other places as well, were mostly the older people. People who had empty homes, whose kids had moved out, had places to welcome Jesus. And so we needed all of the ages, all generations, in order to make Jesus' ministry viable. Because one of the things that delights me most about worship is the one place in society where multiple generations of people who are unrelated interact with one another. And one of the things that delights me most about this community is how much people are allowed to do whatever they want as far as worship leadership, regardless of ages. If a kid wants to ring the bell or be an usher or a communion assistant, you just let them. You don't worry about the fact of if they are mature enough, if they can do it right. Yes, you as an adult might help them and guide them and lead them along the way. And that's okay, and that's great, because they're becoming leaders at young ages. And we also don't have positions that are only relegated for the young. I have very strong feelings that making acolytes only preteens has made more people leave the church than anything else in the world, because preteens do not want to have to sit up front in a funky outfit and be put on stage. And so I give thanks to the fact that we have Olivia as an acolyte today. And I don't know, Val might be the acolyte next week. And I give thanks to the fact that you are not relegating things to age. And yes, it can be distracting when a child is acting out in worship And I will freely admit that I can only get to what can be called road rage when I am behind a very slow-moving person through the aisles of a grocery store. And Judy's laughing because she agrees. And yet, you either switch seats or even better, smile. Give that encouraging smile and knowing, yep, I was there one day being that distracting child, or I will be there hopefully someday being the slow person walking down the hallway. And we take a deep breath and we give thanks because age does not matter to God. What does matter, though, is stagnation. When we've and this can happen at any age. When we've decided that this is the way things have always been done and therefore it should be the way we always will do things. When we only want to sing the songs that we know. When we only want to think about the past and not imagine the future. When we only care about ourselves and not the needs of others. When we focus so deeply on the negative that we cannot see the positive. When we phone it in and coast through life. When we don't give an effort. When we do all of those things, or really even just one or two of them, we start to become stagnant, complacent in our ideas. And then it's harder to share God's love and grace and hope with other people. Because it's harder to share God's love when you are, and share God's love and how it's active in other people's lives when you are so inactive in your own. It's harder to share God's grace with others when you are not willing to give grace to yourself. It is harder to share God's hope when we feel like there is nothing to be hopeful about. David was the king at the age of 30 to the age of 70. That's a long time. And not everything during those 40 years was good. But he lived in communication with God, was sharing God's love and grace and hope with the people of Israel. And from the time he was born and anointed, or from the time he was a boy and anointed as to someday be the king, to the time of his death, age did not matter in his ability to be God's chosen leaders. And so whether you identify yourself closer to that boy being anointed or the old man nearing the end of his life looking back on his reign, I hope you see David in you and realize that regardless of age, you can be a leader for God. That you can share God's love and God's grace and God's hope with others. Because age does not matter to God.